Has the market changed its mind about what the Fed may do next?
We have got to get inflation behind us. I wish there were a painless way to do that. There isn't.
I think this is a two-part policy mistake of historic proportion.
I think the odds of a recession in 2023 are very high.
I think you'd offer the American people an apology.
Welcome back to Financial Stockholm. I'm Christopher Crystal. Today is Wednesday, November 23rd, and 2022. We're talking about what's going on in Sweden and what we're seeing here. Right now, the news is primarily focused on what's going on in the Ukraine. There's a lot of discussion in our papers, some talking about what Germany had originally thought, that maybe it might be only a very short-term issue and then would be resolved. Others thinking that that you're seeing the atrocities committed by both sides and what's happening there. And the children are really the ones that are suffering. The EU has been very big about that, and the schools and the children and getting them education. All while at the same time of ensuring that the grain from the Ukraine is able to go to places like Africa. And so the issue of Ukraine is continuing, of course, and we don't see any resolution towards peace. It does look like something that would be closer to a 20-year scenario rather than a 6-month. If you take the steps, if you take the statements given by Zelensky and you take the statements given by Putin, and the lack of will to resolve, or the previous attempt to have it resolved and then scuttled when Boris Johnson flew over to the Ukraine, you don't look like you're getting any closer to a resolution, and you don't look like you're getting any closer to the terms of either side being met. So this will be a long-term coming, and I think the damage now would be closer to 300 billion in terms of what would be needed for the infrastructure build out. On top of this, the United States is giving billions more in aid to Ukraine. And I think what's important to understand there is when it's said that the United States is giving billions more, it comes in the form of where they're giving money, but they're lending it. So you have lend-lease on the military goods, and so then Ukraine would pay that back. And then there's a lending program setting up on how the money's to be paid so their government can run. So this is, it looks like just money out right now, but as the Ukraine would start to pay back, or American companies and European companies would be put back in to build out the infrastructure that's been destroyed, that's where you get the repayment. And then you have the real question of, was Putin looking to invade the rest of the countries? Would Moldavia be invaded next? Would these other countries be invaded as well? And was that the real gain or game for Putin? So this will be a long-term scenario. We do have the continued question of the Sweden and NATO. Right now we have a bit going on with Turkey, and there are some eyebrows being raised in Europe about Turkey and if it's going to go into Syria and what they're going to do there. And then, of course, you have the issue between Sweden and Turkey not yet resolved on whether the people that Turkey deemed as terrorists should be sent back to Turkey, and then B, there were some recent comments coming out from Swedish politicians that were critical of Erdogan, and so you had protests in Sweden, and then you have subsequently the Swedish ambassador being summoned by the Turkish government to have a discussion. So not clear yet on how close we are to the NATO for Sweden. And then again, the question of, would Sweden actually have nuclear missiles placed in silos in Sweden as part of the NATO agreement? But in the meantime, Sweden does continue to ship munitions. It had lowered it down after the Polish missile strike by the Ukrainian air defense. Ukraine is far from settled, but it continues to feature in the headlines. What we also see is taxes here in Sweden. That's something that's guaranteed in life, right? Taxes. And it looks like the Social Democrat Party will be raising taxes, or wants to raise taxes on households, at least if you read what's coming out of the Moderaterna and the Sverigedemokraterna. And then you see from the I believe it's the Center Party, they're actually looking to lower taxes on companies that would employ younger people. And that's an interesting strategy where you're going to specifically target a demographic. So they're getting involved in identity politics more so than they have before. And there's a recent reaction to the EU talking about percentage of boards and what should be made up of women and men. You have local politicians saying, well, Sweden, we don't have to go by that rule. So it's there's a lot of discussion and there's a lot of question, I think, for many of the people in Sweden about what the soul of Sweden is and how to function. But the most important problem is our energy, and our energy grid is not yet working as it should. We've gone from the highest prices of electricity in southern Sweden to now seeing higher prices in the northern part, and that was a part that was thought to be secure from these price swings or radical price swings like we saw recently. And so you have some Swedish politicians, particularly the Sverigedemokraterna, criticizing how the EU is limiting the Swedish production of its own energy. And that comes through A, regulations in the EU, and B, the purchase or the nationalization of Uniper by the German government, which owns percentage stakes in some of our Swedish power production sites, and as well as the hydro production. So not just nuclear, but the hydro production. And so there's a lot of debate going on. It doesn't seem like much is going on for the citizen. There's, of course, a lot of focus on the real estate market. We continue to have a depressed real estate market. We continue to see discussion about Twitter, which doesn't really affect Sweden, whether President Trump is allowed back on or not. But you see that Sweden is getting caught up in the fray of discussion and not noting that the most important thing that would have happened on Twitter would be the prevention of children's sexual abuse and children trade. So that's something that Elon Musk prioritized and is eliminating. And so that's kind of missed in the Swedish press about Twitter. But they are very focused on what's happening, probably because of the presidential elections. And you're seeing, starting to see a kind of a broader politicization here in Sweden within political parties. One thing that you do see is in the press, some criticism about the COP27 and how it's lost a lot of the teeth from its bite. And because the resolutions really didn't come up with anything addressing the energy issue for Europe, other than to say that the renewables are the way to go. And by renewables, they're not including nuclear, they're including solar and wind. And that's a dangerous strategy when you have periods of time when you cannot use these. And you have also it in a, although it's been well built out in Germany, and we've invested a lot in Sweden and in Denmark, you really don't see it in a position where it could supplant our traditional energy needs. So that's one of the issues that's come out of the COP27. And of course, you see a little bit else in the news, maybe talking about our society as a whole, where we don't have enough teachers for our schools. And then, of course, we're focused on the World Cup. But that's really it that I see coming out of Sweden today that would be of any real impact. And I still don't see any signs of upturn. You know, we had those producer prices in Germany coming out. And my take on that would be that you have lower production, so you have less need for the parts. And you did see a bit of a drop in the electricity prices after Europe was able to refill their gas reserves and supplant some of the reserves or some of the power that they needed with US LNG production. So still not really any good fundamental signs that I see. But although you did see Volkswagen saying that they're going to do electric car production here in Europe by, I believe, 2030, and that's great, but it's opposite of the way that BMW producing the Mini Coopers and EV vehicles in UK has gone, and that was where UK was going to become the top electrical car producer in Europe, has now shifted that production by BMW over to China, and they're using a Great Wall Motor to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how this would impact a company like Northvolt, which is still privately held here in Sweden. But it's so we're still far from fundamentals to say you should be into the market. But short-term trading can always make you money. Long-term trading can make you money as well. You can also lose in both of those scenarios. So we'll wish you the best of luck in your investing, and thank you very much.